I came downstairs at 7 a.m. on the morning of my college graduation to find my mother in the kitchen, frosting a cake that said, "Congratulations on your acceptance, Maddie," in trembling blue icing, and for one full second I let myself believe it might somehow be for me too. It wasn't. My sister Maddie wasn't even graduating that year. She'd just gotten into a college program, a 2-year diploma at the local college. The kind of acceptance letter that arrives in an ordinary envelope with no fanfare attached to it anywhere else in the world, except inside our house. My mother had been planning this cake for a week. I'd heard her on the phone with the bakery in Burlington, going back and forth about fondant colors, asking if they could rush it. I hadn't thought anything of it, because that was simply how things worked in our family, and I'd stopped registering it the way you stop registering a draft in an old house. You just put on another sweater. My name doesn't matter as much as what I need you to understand first, which is that I am not a bitter person. I want to say that clearly before anything else, because the moment you start telling a story like this, people assume you're nursing a grudge, polishing it like silverware you bring out for company. I'm not. I was raised going to the United Church on Sundays in a small town outside Kingston, Ontario, the kind of place where everyone's parents, where you learn, early, that forgiveness is supposed to be a virtue you practice quietly, without an audience. I believe in second chances. I believe people can be flawed and still be loved. But somewhere along the way, I had to learn the difference between forgiving someone and letting them tell you that what happened to you simply didn't happen, that you imagined the cold, that the house was never actually that drafty. I grew up in a 2-story brick house with a maple tree out front that my dad tapped every March for syrup, more as a hobby than anything practical, the kind of detail people loved when they visited. My parents, Don and Carol, were well liked. My dad coached pee-wee hockey for 12 years. My mom ran the silent auction at the church bazaar and made a butter tart that people requested by name. From the outside, we were the family other families compared themselves to. From the inside, I spent most of my childhood doing quiet arithmetic, trying to figure out what exactly was wrong with me that made me the daughter who had to earn things that Maddie simply received. Maddie is 2 years younger than me. She has this effortless warmth, the kind that makes a room turn toward her without her even trying. And I want to be fair here, because she didn't ask to be born glowing. She didn't choose to be the favorite any more than I chose to be the other one. But she got the version of our parents that showed up, that remembered, that celebrated. I got the version that was left over, tired, already spent. I was the one who got A's without anyone reminding me to study. I babysat the neighbors' kids, starting at 13, and put every dollar into a savings account at the credit union downtown. Because somewhere in me I already understood that university wasn't going to be handed to me the way it might be handed to her. When I brought home a report card with 5 A's and 1 A- in grade 11, my dad glanced at it for maybe 4 seconds and said, "Good, good," and went back to the TV. When Maddie passed her driving test on the second try after failing the first, they took her to the keg for dinner and put the little temporary license on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a loon. I told myself it was fine. I got very good at telling myself that. The day I want to tell you about was my university convocation, in June, the spring after I finished my degree in Kingston. I hadn't asked for a party. I wasn't expecting a banner or a cake of my own, not really, not by then. I just wanted, I think, for someone in my family to look at me on that one day and act like it mattered that I'd done it. Paid for almost the whole thing myself, between OSAP loans and 3 years of weekend shifts at a diner on Princess Street, carrying plates while other kids my age went to Frosh Week and reading week trips I couldn't afford to join. I came downstairs that morning, already dressed, my gown draped over my arm because I didn't want to wrinkle it in the car, and found my mother piping the last curls of icing onto Maddie's cake. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and that particular sugary warmth that good news is supposed to smell like. Maddie was on a stool, swinging her legs, watching with this bright bouncing energy she's had since she was small. For 1 second, stupidly, my chest lifted, because some small idiot part of me thought, maybe this is for both of us today. Maybe somebody remembered there were 2 big things happening in this family this month. My mom looked up and smiled at Maddie. "Come see. It's done." She turned the cake so Maddie could read it. "Congratulations on your acceptance, Maddie." My sister's acceptance letter had come 3 days earlier. My convocation was in 4 hours. I stood there in my socks on the kitchen tile, gown over my arm, and nobody said anything to me for what felt like a very long time, but was probably closer to a minute. My dad came in from the garage, looked at the cake and said, "That's great, Carol. Looks great," and kissed my mother on the cheek. I was standing close enough that he had to have seen me. It was another beat before my mom glanced over, almost as an afterthought, and said, "Oh, big day for you too, eh? You'll want to eat something before we go." I didn't cry. I've never been someone who cries in kitchens. I poured myself a coffee in my graduation dress and went and sat on the porch steps until it was time to leave. We did go to the ceremony. I want to be fair about that. Because people always assume these stories end with someone standing alone in an empty gymnasium. And that's not what happened. They came. They sat in the bleachers at the convocation hall in Kingston. My dad in his good blazer. My mom with a bouquet of grocery store carnations that cost $12. When they called my name, I heard my mother clap. But afterward, in the lobby, surrounded by other families taking photos, hugging, crying, my dad checked his watch and said we should get going soon because there was a thing at the Legion for Maddie's acceptance. That evening, people were coming by 6, so we left my own graduation early to set up streamers for my sister's party. I sat at that party in the dress I'd worn under my gown, eating a square of someone else's congratulations cake. And nobody mentioned that I'd walked across a stage that afternoon in a cap and gown. Not once, the whole night. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time before that. Bringing up the invisible stuff in our house never went anywhere good. My mother would get hurt and defensive. My father would go quiet in that specific way that made the whole house feel like it was holding its breath. And somehow, every single time, I would end up apologizing for making them feel bad about something they'd done to me. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom. I was 22 and still living at home to save money. Because rent in Kingston wasn't cheap, and my parents had told me more than once that staying home through university just made sense. And I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the laptop I'd bought myself in second year because the family one was Mazzie's for school, even though Maddie was still in high school at the time. I thought about the winter coat I wore for 4 Ontario winters because my mom said new ones were a lot right now. The same month, they put a deposit down on Maddie's first car. I thought about every parent-teacher interview they'd skipped for me and every single one they'd shown up early for her. And then I thought, I have a degree now. I have options. I didn't leave that week. I'm not a person who does things impulsively. I had almost $9,000 saved between my diner tips and a co-op placement I'd done in my last year, and I quietly started sullying and looking, not at apartments in Kingston, where everyone knew everyone, but further away. Halifax, of all places, where a friend from my program had moved after graduation and kept telling me how much she loved it. The ocean, the slower pace, rent that was almost reasonable if you didn't mind an older building. I applied for jobs in health communications, which was my field, told absolutely no one, and 3 weeks later got an offer from a small firm that did public health campaigns for the Nova Scotia government. Not flashy, steady, decent benefits. A real adult salary, the first one I'd ever see land in my account. I found out on a Thursday, on my lunch break at the diner where I was still picking up shifts that summer. Standing in the alley behind the kitchen where the staff went to take calls, I read the email 4 times. I let myself cry for about 90 seconds. The kind of crying that's mostly relief. And then I wiped my face because my break was almost over, and I had tables to get back to. I gave my parents notice the way you'd give an employer notice. I wrote them a letter. I'm someone who needs to get things exactly right when they matter, and I knew if I tried to say it out loud I'd lose my nerve halfway through. And left it on the kitchen table on a Sunday morning before they were up. I told them about the job, the apartment I'd already signed a lease on, the moving date in 3 weeks. I told them I loved them and that I hoped, with some distance, we could find a better version of our relationship than the one we currently had. My dad called me at work that afternoon. He didn't say congratulations. He said, "You're really doing this without even sitting down and talking to us first? That's a pretty selfish way to handle this, you know." I told him I'd had a good teacher, and I hung up before he could say anything else. I moved to Halifax that August. For the first month there were a handful of stiff texts from my mom. Was I eating enough? Had I found a doctor yet? The kind of questions that look like care from a distance but feel, up close, like checking a box. Then the texts thinned out, and by October they'd basically stopped. What I didn't expect was the call from my new HR department in late October, asking me to come in and clarify something on my benefits enrollment. A woman named Priya in the office, kind, careful with her words, sat me down and told me someone had contacted them, claiming I was still being claimed as a dependent under a family health and dental plan back in Ontario, which, if it went through, would have created a conflict that could have delayed or denied my own coverage at the new job for months, while it got sorted out. My parents, and I only found this out because Priya, bless her, had kept the email, had submitted a message to my new employer's benefits administrator claiming I was misrepresenting my employment status and was, quote, still primarily supported by her family. I sat in that meeting room with a window looking out over a parking lot in Dartmouth and felt something in my chest go completely still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. It took about 5 weeks of back and forth. Emails, a notarized letter confirming my own address and tenancy, pay stubs, a call with Service Canada to confirm I wasn't listed anywhere as a dependent, to get it cleared up. I won, in the sense that it got resolved and my coverage was never actually interrupted. But I lost a chunk of that fall lying awake at 1 in the morning in my new apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what kind of parents do that? What kind of people try to mess with their own kids' health benefits 3 provinces away, weeks after she's already gone? I didn't tell anyone. Not my roommate, not the 2 friends I'd made at work. I just kept showing up, kept doing my job well, kept being the version of myself nobody back home had ever bothered to really look at. By that winter, I'd settled into a rhythm. I picked up a few freelance writing projects on weekends, for the extra cushion. I started going for runs along the harbor front, which sounds small, but it was the first hobby I'd ever had that existed purely because I wanted it, not because it looked good on an application. I called my grandmother in Peterborough most Sundays, my mom's mother, who'd never once made me feel like the leftover daughter. She'd always say the same thing, you just keep at it, love, you're doing fine. By spring, my manager had put me up for a promotion. A professor I'd kept in touch with from Kingston asked if I'd co-author a short piece for a public health journal on financial literacy programs for first-generation university students, which felt like the universe being a little bit funny with me. My parents heard eventually, the way small towns do. Somebody's cousin knows somebody. My mom sent a Facebook message that said, heard things are going well out east. Maddie's diploma program is going great too, she made the dean's list. That was the whole message. No question for me, just an update on Maddie, filed under the same envelope as my own life. I stared at that message for a long while and then archived it without replying. The next year, something in me loosened enough to want to put words to it, not to hurt anyone. I want to be clear about that. Because I know how that part sounds, but because I needed somewhere to put it that wasn't just the inside of my own ribcage. I started writing, just short posts, on a blog I didn't tell a soul about at first. About growing up in a house where love seemed to run on a meter only one of us could see. About working 3 jobs, through a degree, while your sibling gets a car for passing a driving test. About what it actually costs, quietly, to be the responsible one in a family that mistakes your competence for not needing anything. Within a couple of months, the posts had been read by close to 30,000 people, mostly women, a lot of them Canadian, leaving comments that said things like, I thought this was just my family, or I've never seen someone put words to my exact childhood. I answered as many as I could. One of those readers turned out to produce a podcast out of Toronto about estranged families, and she reached out and asked if I'd come on for an episode. We talked for almost 2 hours. It became one of the most listened to episodes they'd put out that year. My parents heard about it. My aunt sent me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook status not long after. Some people only ever tell one side of a story. We know what really happened in our house. I thought about responding for a long time. I had plenty I could have said, but I realized, sitting with my phone in my hand, that I didn't need to win that argument anymore. I'd already won the actual life. That's the part nobody tells you, going in. Leaving isn't the ending of the story. It's barely past the first chapter. The harder, slower work is everything after. Relearning how to trust people who aren't trying to keep score against you. Learning to take a compliment without flinching. Learning to stop apologizing for the space you take up in a room. I still catch myself doing that sometimes. Shrinking down out of old habit. Those patterns don't just dissolve because you moved 18 hours away by car. But here's the other thing that doesn't dissolve. The part of you that decided, even once, to keep going anyway. I'm 28 now. I got that promotion, and then another one. I live in a 1-bedroom in the north end of Halifax with big windows. I chose specifically because I'd spent my whole childhood in rooms that felt like other people's leftovers. I have a rescue cat named Birch, who hates everyone except me with real commitment. I have friends who'd drive 2 hours in a snowstorm if I called them and meant it. I have my grandmother, who still calls every Sunday and always asks the same thing. Tell me something good, love. My parents and I aren't close, not in any real sense. There have been a few attempts. A stilted phone call at Christmas, a birthday card last year, signed only Mom and Dad. No message inside it at all. I don't know if we'll ever find our way to something real. I'm not closed off to it, if it ever came with honesty in it, real accountability, not just an absence of conflict. But I'm not waiting around for it either, and I think that distinction matters more than people give it credit for. Maddie and I text now and then. She's grown up a lot since that night with the cake. She told me once, a couple of years ago, that she'd always had a feeling something was off in how we were treated, and that she'd carried some guilt about it for a long time without knowing what to do with it. I told her she didn't owe me that guilt. She was a kid too. None of it was her fault any more than it was mine. I'm writing this down because I know there's someone reading it who recognizes the shape of it. The one who learned to read a room before she even learned to read a book. The one who got so good at being grateful for crumbs that she forgot, for years, that the whole table was ever supposed to be hers too. You deserve the whole table. You always did. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't leaving Kingston, and it wasn't that phone call with my dad. And it wasn't even the 5 weeks of paperwork to fix what they tried to do to my benefits. The hardest thing was choosing, on the ordinary days, to believe I was worth the life I was building, even when the two people who should have believed that first never quite managed to. My story isn't finished. I don't think anyone's ever really is, but I get to decide what happens in the next chapter now, and some mornings, that's still the most surprising thing about all of it.